Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us once again on this beautiful, crisp morning, which I'm sure you're all loving, right? I know I am. It's good to, get a little chill in the ear to, to open up the pores in your head. Okay, if you don't mind muting yourself, would be appreciated. That I don't have to mute you. Okay, so we're up to page 70. We're moving right along, day 10 of this wonderful class and this wonderful book. And there's a very interesting thing that comes up in this, something that's very common and something that, that really has to be talked about. And the question, the dilemma is over here like this, right? Let's just read the dilemma and then we'll talk about it. Let's go straight to the dilemma. So the thing's like this, right? Lily's sister-in-law, Mindy, gets on her nerves. I guess that happens sometimes, right? That sister-in-laws or sisters or, certain people get on their nerves. Lily somehow always manages to slip in a negative, critical comment whenever Mindy's name comes up. Her comments are often, right, discussed as a joke, right, or as helpful observation, right? You always know those people. I just want to help. Right? And they somehow critique your parenting, critique your the way you talk, the way you do things, right? And it could come out negative. And even though Mindy doesn't seem to suspect any animosity as a negative, Lily knows she is guilty of lashon hara. What should she do? And so Lily's sister-in-law, Mindy, gets on her nerves, and sometimes Lily slips up. And she's aware of herself, which, again, we're talking about over here, and we're moving on already. We've spoken about being aware of oneself, right? So she knows her situation. She never means to be negative, right? She doesn't mean to be hurtful, right? But it just comes out, right? It just comes out, you're at a family party, right? Friends get together, co-workers at the cafeteria in the good old days when we had that, people hung out together, right? But people and you lay down a joke or you lay down a comment or either directly to him or her, right, or not directly amongst friends. If she's Lily's, let's just use their names. Mindy is she's so cute the way she dresses her kids. They just don't match. They just or it's try to do things in a funny way, but at the same time it comes out negative, right? Or sometimes trying to be helpful, and saying if you are a little more, if you are a little more caring, if you're a little more, if you are observing more on the way your kids do things or how you work, and if you are a little more detail oriented in work or whatever it is, and you're just trying to be helpful, so you're not really meaning something negative. You don't mean it to be negative. What should you do? All right, so the question's like this. First and foremost, you have to stop. All right, the question is over here, right? Is this lashon hara? Right? Is this lashon hara? And with being lashon hara, right? Do I tell Mindy? Do I not tell Mindy? Do I tell this person? Do I not tell this person? Right? What do I do? What do I do in such a situation? Any thoughts?
Wait, do you tell Mindy about
what I did? I'm so sorry what I did to you.
You're the sister.
Yeah, I'm the sister-in-law. Or let's just switch
it.
Like
a third party. Okay.
No. I'm the person that did it.
It keeps
Yeah, and I realize I'm doing wrong, and not in front of her necessarily, to friends and to people, right? So she doesn't know, right? Or let's say in front of her, is this lashon hara or not? I don't mean to be negative. I'm either just being playful, or I'm what's it called again? Or I'm just trying to be helpful. I don't mean to be negative. Guys, what do you think? I don't mean to be negative. I'm either go ahead, Jim.
Okay, this is Jim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning to everybody. Well, first, her intentions are important, but what's more important is how it makes Mindy feel. And if it bothers Mindy what she says, she needs to have a very calm, open, honest conversation with Lily and say, what you're saying to me hurts my feelings and is hurtful. That's one thing you do. You can get into a discussion also, if you want to, with her, asking do you realize what you're saying is perceived by me and probably other people as negative? Because she might really not be aware of it, but frankly, most people, when they say things, know exactly what they're saying. And some have not a clue that it's hurtful, but most people do. So I would say first have an open conversation with her, letting her know that regardless of if she's aware of it or not, it hurts her.
Okay, so Jim, you're saying very good, and that's probably the right thing to do. The question is, what is she obligated to do, right? So you're right, in a healthy manner, and to make sure that they mend fences, and again, Mindy might not have reached Mindy, might have yes or no, but so the question is, right, is she obligated to say something to Mindy or not? Right? But you're right. The best thing is always communication.
So
communication
the answer is I
working
don't know.
things out.
The answer to that is I don't know.
Okay.
I don't obligated.
Well, I'm glad. That's why I'm here. Yes, Emily, what were you going to say?
So if Mindy's not aware, then it's only going to upset her, right?
Can she speak up a little bit? We can't hear her.
Yeah, you have to speak up.
If Mindy's not aware.
I'll repeat what she says.
If Mindy's not aware, then by Lily saying, I said this mean thing about you and I said that mean thing about you, now you've offended her when she hadn't even known.
Okay.
I think the answer is no. I think Lily needs to work on her speech, and she needs to work on seeing it in a positive light. I don't think she's saying it.
Okay, very good. So we have two sides over here. I'm going to repeat what Emily said. And I was a little, I left the case a little open because I wanted this discussion, right? So Emily's saying if Mindy doesn't know, right, so then she shouldn't say something to her. And we have this idea, just to bring it out in a different way, and then I'll come back to what Emily's saying. There's a verse in the Torah that says something very interesting. The verse in the Torah says, you should rebuke your friend, right? But you should not do sin and to him, right? So you should rebuke your friend, but don't do sin to your friend. So the commentary says, what's this? You don't do sin to him. It doesn't make any sense. The wording doesn't make any sense, right? You give rebuke, and what does sin have to do? You shouldn't sin to your friend all the time, right? So there's many different explanations, but one of the ideas is that if you're the one that's, and I'm just I'm showing a parable between the two. It's two different scenarios. But one of the ideas, it's brought down in the Code of Jewish Law too, that when you go ahead and rebuke your friend, right, you are going to embarrass your friend, and that friend is not necessarily going to listen to you, right? So then it's not your place to go ahead, because what you're going to do is you're going to hurt your friend's feelings, and you have to be cautious about hurting your friend's feeling. Now, again, if they're going to listen to you, or if you're a parent or you're an authoritative figure that has the right and the purpose to do it, so then that's that you're supposed to do it. And again, that's beyond the scope of our conversation. Maybe later on he'll bring into it. It does tie into Lashon Hara a little bit, right? But the point I'm trying to bring out is that we see that we're very sensitive to people's feelings, even when you are trying to do something positive for that individual. Right, and the sensitivity of someone's feeling is extremely, extremely important in Judaism. I spoke about that in my morning minute yesterday, right? But we see this even in halacha, right? We have to be very careful when we say something, we don't say something. So the point I'm trying to bring out is that Emily's bringing out a valid point also, right? You both bring out valid points, that if the friend, let's say Mindy, your friend, doesn't know, didn't find out, right? You kept it very close. You only told one very close friend, or you only told your spouse. Again, that doesn't make it right or wrong, right? Like we spoke about last week, right? But you're keeping a very close knit, and you don't almost positive Mindy didn't find out. So by going ahead and telling Mindy what you said, right? Then you're gonna hurt her, right? You're gonna hurt her. You might hurt your relationship, right? And yeah, maybe in the long run you're gonna clear the air and it'll be bigger and better. But halachically, that could be a problem of hurting your friend. So I left the case open because it really does. It depends. There's two, and there's gonna be a third criteria that I'm gonna mention in a minute. And before that third criteria, right, it really depends if Mindy knows or Mindy doesn't know, right? Or if she's been part of the conversation, right? And it's just sort of like jokingly, and she like shrugs it off or whatever. So then if she knows, so then Jim, you're right? If she knows, so then you definitely should go over to her and apologize and say, I really didn't mean it, but I know it came out the wrong way, and maybe I did mean it a little bit unintentionally because whatever, and sort of open up that conversation because Mindy knows, whoever the person is knows, and therefore you have to try to clear the air, and you have to speak to the person and directly talk to them. But if Mindy doesn't know, and you're almost positive Mindy doesn't know, so then, on a regular scenario, right, you should not go ahead and tell Mindy because then what you're going to do is you're going to bring up animosity. You're going to bring up feelings that are not necessarily there. And what you could do is you just could create a bigger problem than there was before, right? So this whole thing of just being open and telling your feelings, right, is not always the best. Being honest is honesty in Judaism, and not to get too off topic, but we know, right, Yaakov is called Midas Emes. Jacob is called the Midah, the attribute of truth. Now we know that Jacob, right, not to get too off topic with Jacob, but Jacob has done some stuff in his life that we might be a little skeptical if that was truth or not, right? He tricked his father by getting the blessings, right? He tricked his uncle, Lavan, in 2 weeks ago's parsha, and he ran away while he was away, right? He didn't tell him, right? So he did some things that were a little tricky, but he still called me to say Emes, right? Not to get, again, too off topic, but Midas Emes in a nutshell, which is, we gave a lunch and learn on this once, right? Midas Emes is the final truth. Now, what determines final truth or not, based on halacha, right? Based on Jewish thought, which is beyond the scope of our class today, but Emes doesn't necessarily mean to say that you reveal everything, right? That's not Emes. Emes is if you're coming to a final shalom, final peace. And sometimes the way to reach a final peace is by not revealing something, as long as you know that it's not going to get back to that person. If you have a concern that it will, right, and you said it to a bunch of friends at a Kiddush, right, the good old days, right, or you had a Zoom meeting with a bunch of friends and you said something, so then you have to go tell your friend, because don't be stupid, right? As we said before, chaver isale, right? People talk, and eventually will reach that person, and then it's always better for them to hear it from you first than hearing it from someone else, and then you have to go ahead and defend yourself. All right, so it really depends. Now, to throw in a wrench, that is, if you look at the halacha, right, and that's why it's important to really study this, and of course, just to read it by itself is good, and to, at a Shabbos table or things like that, or it's really important. But I'm really enjoying this because I'm doing research behind what is actually being said over here, and they go directly to the third case, right? They say like this: Lashon hara is a sin between man and his fellow, right? As well as between man and Hashem, right? The way to repent is to confess the error out loud, regret it sincerely, and resolve never to repeat it, right? In the above case, while the speaker must repent before Hashem, she does not have to confess or speak out forgiveness from her victim unless her words caused her harm. Now, I looked this up, right? And this is something very important. We have two categories of mitzvahs, right? We have something called ben adam l'chaveiro, between ben adam l'makom. Now, ben adam l'chaveiro is between man and his fellow. What category would you say lashon hara falls under? No doubt, Ben Adam l'chaveiro, between man and his fellow, right? You are speaking about someone else, right? So of course it's Ben Adam l'chaveiro. But like we know, everything is also Ben Adam l'makom. It's between man and God, because God prohibited you from doing this. And one always has to remember that the prohibitions are between, if you slap someone across the face, God forbid, right? If you say something negative about someone, you steal from someone, right? Anything that you do that's Ben Adam l'chaveiro is also Ben Adam l'makom. So when you are trying to get forgiveness, when you're trying to clear the ear, when you're trying to make sure that you are repenting and changing your ways, one always has to remember that they also have to ask forgiveness from God. Now, God tells us that, and this is brought down, and we speak about this during the 10 days of repentance and Elul, and it's shoved down our throats, not in a negative way, in a positive way, right? That mitzvot ben adam l'chaveiro, the commandment between man and his fellow, right? Even Yom Kippur cannot bring forgiveness if you don't ask your friend for forgiveness. And if you don't go ahead and ask your friend forgiveness, even Yom Kippur, which Yom Kippur is mechaper, Yom Kippur is atones for all sins, even Yom Kippur does not get rid of the Aveira if you don't appease your friend and ask him for forgiveness. So this is the backdrop of what it's saying over here. If your friend does not know about this, and of course it's Ben Adam l'makom, and you have to ask God for forgiveness, but it's also Ben Adam l'chaveiro, it's between man and his fellow, right? So therefore, the obvious thing should be, right, like Jim, even in a case where the person doesn't know, right? Because I'm stuck, I'm stuck. I want forgiveness. I realize I did something wrong, right? And especially over here when I didn't have bad intentions, right? So what do I do? What do I do? I want forgiveness. So the halacha is, and the Shara Tshuva speaks about this, that if there was no direct pain to this person, and it's sometimes hard to know, but what you said was, something that was negative, but it's not going to cause any harm, any monetary harm, any other kind of harm to this person. Meaning to say that you just talk to your spouse, right, about it, and your spouse knows how you are, right, and they're not going to look differently at their sister or their brother or their best friend or whatever it is. Or your best friend, you spoke to your best friend, and your best friend knows that you're venting, right, and your best friend knows that you're just letting loose, and they're not going to look at that person any different, right, or there's not going to be any monetary difference because of you saying, oh, this person's so unorganized, and I can't believe I can't work with this person, and they just always muff up, and I always have to, look after them or whatever it is. It's never going to get back to the boss. It's never going to get back to this person. They're not going to lose their job. They're not going to, no one's going to say comments to them in public, right? So there is no direct harm to this person. So then the halacha is that since you did not have intentions to hurt this person, right? So even though generally you have to appease the person, ben adam l'chaveiro, in this scenario, the halacha is that you don't. Because what you can do is you can cause more harm to your friend by trying to appease them, and where there is no harm happening right now. And again, back to this idea that the feelings of an individual and harming someone is so severe in Judaism, like we brought out beforehand with asking for repentance, asking for forgiveness, or rebuking someone, which is a big deal in Judaism. Of course, we have to rebuke and we have to make sure, but by the right person. So too says the halacha over here, and it's brought up from the Shara Tshuva, Rishon Rabbeinu Yonah, who lived in the 1300s, right, that one should not ask forgiveness from their friend because they didn't have negative connotations to their friends, even though it might come out that way. There's no actual harm to their friend. Therefore, what they have to do is they have to speak to God and ask God for forgiveness because there's still that ben adam l'makom between man and God. But since they didn't have any intentions to hurt their friend, and there is no harm to their friend that has been caused, so therefore they don't have to ask forgiveness. Now, if they had intentions to hurt their friends, they're being malicious. They can't stand their friend. It's not like the scenario over here where it was like said jokingly or trying to be helpful or things like that. They got angry, they got afraid, and I can't stand it, I can't, you know what they do, right? You know how they, right? And they say something negative in a harmful way. Something in this situation is different, right? Because then you actually transgressed. And that's another scenario. That's not our case right now. And I don't want to talk about it, right? We have to think about it, right? I have to do a little more iyun. I have to do a little more, research into that, because that's a little different. But the scenario that we are in now, and I would say that primarily 99% of the time where it won't harm the person is when it's done unintentionally. I'm not saying that 99% of the time when you're doing it unintentionally, it doesn't harm the person. I was very careful with my words, right? Because a lot of times it hurts the person, even if it's done unintentionally. But 99% of the time when it does not hurt the person, it's because it's done unintentionally, and you only keep it to a very small group. You said it in a joking way, or whatever it is, right? And therefore, it's not going to come back to hurt the person, and that's the scenario. But be very careful that when you do say things jokingly, it's very possible that it will come back and hurt the person. And that's the next halacha. If you finish off, if you see, but let's finish this paragraph, right? Unless her words caused harm. For instance, the victim was rejected for a job, or a shidduch, right, or a date, right, or in which case lashon hara is also a sin now between man and his fellow, because now there was actual harm that was done to the person, right? She has to go and ask forgiveness from her sister-in-law, even if her sister-in-law didn't know that she was the one that caused her harm. Right, you have to go ahead and go appease and try to get ahead of it, and like what Jim was saying beforehand, so you have to talk it out and you have to speak about it, and you have to be ready for the consequences of your actions that you did by talking that way. But since you now caused that person harm for whatever it is, right? Even if they lost a good friend, right? Because of that, right? That person doesn't talk to them anymore because you said something to them and they can't imagine talking to that person. Lost a job, right? People don't want to date her or him, right? Whatever the scenario is, right? You have to now go ahead and appease that person and ask them for forgiveness. Is that clear? Any questions or comments on that? Go ahead, Emily.
Okay, I have a question. So I feel like you said there's like, if you say joke, and then you said it out of like you're really upset. But what about something in the middle? If you like, you tell your spouse like, so-and-so is late again, always late, right? Like it's not like, just it's like it's not like a joke, but maybe it's not, maybe you're not like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. So Emily's asking, what happens if you have a scenario where it's in between, right? You're making a comment, right? You're making a comment.
So-and-so is always late.
Yes, so-and-so is always late, right? I just can't believe it. Yeah, so-and-so, Chaim Yankel. We like the name Chaim Yankel, right? I don't think anybody on here is named Chaim Yankel, last I checked, right? Okay, right? Right? Listen, we're on Zoom. It could be international. Right? But Chaim Yankel, right, is always late. Have you noticed Chaim Yankel is always late? Okay. So it's very important to realize that the words that you say, if they're not positive, they're probably negative. Why are you saying Chaim Yankel is always late? Why are you saying it?
Because you're frustrated because you're waiting.
Okay,
right?
so then.
You're annoyed that this person.
Very good. So you're trying to bring out a point to people that they should know that Chaim Yankel is always late.
Like you're telling your spouse, like, you're waiting for the person always, right? So it's not like malicious, but so I'm just asking. I'm not saying it's okay to say it. I get that it's not okay.
Right. You want to know what category does it fall under?
Yeah, and I know that's not healthy for your spouse. But listen, you say that, I get all that. But,
right. So I would say like this, right? I would say like this, and it's an interesting question. We'll see what comes up later. Right? It's an interesting question, right? But I would say like this: if there's no physical harm done, you're speaking to your spouse and you're saying, Chaim Yankel is always late. Here we go again. We're gonna wait for him, and your spouse knows, and you guys are like, oh yeah, Chaim Yankel is always late. So then I would say it's sort of it's not negative, right? You're stating a fact, right? That's not necessarily negative, and you're not saying it in a negative way, right? And it's not getting out to anybody. It's just between the two of you, right? So then that's, again, better not to say it, but that won't be considered lashon hara. And if you're amongst friends, you say, oh, Chaim Yankel is always late. Here we go again. And you're hanging out with a bunch of people, and you say, there we go again, right? We're waiting to play some hockey, and we're waiting for Chaim Yankel to come and play hockey. He's a last man on the team playing basketball or going out for a drink or whatever it is, and we need a 10th man on the team for minyan, right? Here we go again. He says he's coming, but he's always late. So then, yeah, no, that's lashon hara, because even though you don't mean to say it that way, but it's going to go out to other people. You're saying something negative, and now you're changing people's perspective, even if they knew it in the back of the head, but you're bringing it out. That's a problem. It's a sort of problem. Right, but if you're just saying it to your spouse and you both know, and you just, here we go again. Okay, whatever. We're gonna have to wait a couple of minutes, right? You have to be very careful how you say it, right? But what's it called again? But it's not necessarily lashon hara, and you don't have to go ahead and tell the person. Okay, Craig, is there anything to be done if you hear lashon hara, even if the person that said it did it unintentionally, right? So we spoke about Craig. Good question, right? Craig is asking what happens if you're the one that is on the receiving it, right? You're the one that is hearing this, right? About Emily or about Chaim Yankel, right? And now, what do you do if you hear lashon hara? It's a very good question. All right, we're going to talk about that later, right? The recipient of lashon hara, you have to go ahead and now tell the person, because you're in a nutshell over here. If you go ahead and tell the person, then what you're doing really is saying lashon hara about the person that said about that person, right? So you're really in sort of catch-22 over here. So we'll talk about that probably later, but sort of just to throw out right now, I would say that you do not have to tell the person, right? And what you have to do for yourself is not accept the lashon hara, right? And try as much as you can to switch the situation, which, if you turn to page 73, I was going to talk about this right now, but if you turn to page 73, right, of grow in your awareness, right, they talk about that a little bit, right? That is sort of an example of, it's a very interesting parable that they give, right? You're driving on the street, right? I always wondered this, right? People pay tons of money for advertisements on bulletin boards and things like that. And who looks at them, right? Who looks at them? Right? So, on the highway, I don't know, people, I guess, look, or you're sort of just driving straight, so your eyes wander a little bit, don't wander too much if you're driving. Right? So then, people are looking for the next, rest stop, or they're looking for a hotel or a place to eat. So then, maybe I understand. But in the city streets here in San Jose, right, a big billboard right on top of there, right? Who's looking at them? You're driving. And you have to really focus on driving, because it could be stop and go any second. So the logic is, if you notice, and I don't want to get too off topic on bulletin boards, but if you notice, most bulletin boards, right, are near a stoplight, right, are near a traffic light, right? That people, for the people that stop at the traffic light, right? People that stop at the traffic light, they have time and they wander. That's why all of a sudden you hear people honking, right? Come on, it was 30 seconds. That's probably mostly for people that are on their phones, right? During the traffic light, right? But bulletin boards are there that when you're stuck at a traffic light, you start looking around and you notice a storefront, or you notice a bulletin board, and it gets you in, right, to thinking about it. And then when you go into the store, you start looking around even more, right? And you could go ahead and read their parable. The idea is that it's the same thing with conversations, right? The same thing with conversations. If you stop for a second in a conversation, right, you will be able to focus on what this conversation is about. And then you're able to either press the gas and say, no, I'm moving along, I'm not stopping here, right? Or you say, well, let me just, let me just hear for a second. And then you get caught up inside the store and you start, being part of the conversation. That's where you are now in the fault, even if you're the one that's hearing it, right? So, page 73 goes into it a little bit. I wasn't going to go into it today, but good question, Craig, right? The idea is that one has to be aware of their surroundings. And the way to not transgress lashon hara when you are being the receiver is making sure that you put the brakes on, right, to the conversation, or press the gas to move away from the conversation, right? And there's many different scenarios. You could change the topic. We spoke about this in the classes before, right? You could change the conversation. You could bring up another topic, right? Or you could just move away from the conversation. So you are not at fault if you do something right away to show that you didn't want to hear that conversation, right? What you hear is what you hear. But over here, the scenario of I'm just observing, I'm just listening, I'm not being part of the conversation, I'm just a third wheel. This is a scenario when you're just sitting there and not doing anything. You are doing a lot, and you're actually you're doing a negative commandment by just being passive because you're listening and you're actually paying attention. Right? If you go ahead and put earplugs in, you're good. If you go ahead and change the conversation, if you go ahead and move out of the way, then you're good. Even if you heard something, right? Then you have to go ahead and tell yourself that I don't believe that, right? Or if there's a cautious, you have to be cautious of what you heard, and we'll talk about later. You could, put things in motion that you're staying cautious, but about that individual, you're still not allowed to believe that scenario or that thing about the individual, but you can still be cautious about it. And that's, again, another conversation. We'll talk about that later. Okay, good question, Craig. Okay, let's move on. Yeah? Okay, we got time. Let's move on. That's a very interesting, as we said, a very interesting discussion. Now, moving along to a similar situation, but a little different. Right, and this happens. This happens, my friends. Right, if you turn to page 72, right, you say something as a comment, right, in a joking way, right? Let's say let's just use their example, right? You live in Israel, right? I lived in Israel for a couple of years, and when I was living in Israel, let's say, hypothetically, right, in a different world, I own my apartment in Israel, right? Didn't happen, right? And I wanted to do some siputzim. Siputzim is the renovations, right? I want to do some siputzim, some renovation, right? And I hired a kablan. A kablan is a contractor, right? And the contractor did some work for me. Whatever, he was okay. He wasn't so great. He was a little, as Emily would say, he was always late, right? Right? I don't know, he got the job done, he got the job done. I personally didn't like the way he did it so much. I'm back in America, right? This guy is an Israeli kablan, right? He's in Israel, right? And I'm back in America. I came home for Pesach, right? I'm at my parents' house, my in-laws' house, or whatever it is, and I make like a joke. Oh, we just got our apartment just redone, and the kablan is a little slow. He's an interesting guy, whatever. He's like, and you say it like in a joking way. Now, what's the difference between this scenario and the scenario before? This scenario is that when you're saying what you said, there's no shadow, there's no thought in your mind that this would ever come to harm this person. This is an Israeli kablan, an Israeli contractor. I'm in Canada, right, in Toronto, right, or wherever it is. I'm in Jacksonville, right. This person is not going to get affected by that thing. I'm saying it only to immediate family, right, and as a joke and whatever it is, right. And and you said it in a joking way, the example they give over here is, let's say his name was Moshe Bendit, right? And you should have known him. But you say something cute about his name or whatever it is, and sort of a joke. And there's no way that you would think, or any scenario at that point of time, that will come back to haunt you, right? Now what happened, right? This kablan decided to make a yerida. Yerida is what they call when you leave Israel and you move outside of Israel. And he happens to move to Jacksonville, right? He heard there's a great Sephardic minyan here, right? So he decides to move to Jacksonville, right? And now he's looking for a job. And the one person that you told, right, about this thing, right, is looking to hire. And he remembers from 7 years ago, right, because it was a joke, right, or whatever it is. Oh, yeah, Moshe the kablan, right? He was, and now it's possible that he's going to lose his job. Is that your fault? Right? Is that your fault? Are you responsible for that? So remember, we said that when it is your fault and the person gets harmed, you have to go ahead and tell the person. And this is what builds up from the case beforehand. So the case beforehand is directly. Right? It's right away. You're telling people it's going to harm them. Right? You amongst a whole bunch of friends, or you tell coworkers in work, that person, I always have to take care of their load, and they always dump it on me. And I always take care of it because I care. I'm sensitive about the person, but you're still saying that, and it's going to affect their job. Or you say something amongst friends, oh, that person, they're a little interesting, and shidduch comes up, someone asking questions about this individual, and I don't know if you should really date that person. I heard they're a little interesting. All right, so it's directly connected, and it's possible from your words that harm is going to come. Over here, when you said it, you didn't have any intentions of harm. But more than that, right? You didn't even have a shadow in your mind. There's no doubt in your mind, right, that any harm is going to come out. Right? It'll never cross paths. It's harmless, right? You know, it's like like, you know, example. You know, how many times do we tell the person, for those that are talkers? I don't know too many talkers, right? But those that are talkers, right? In the good days of flying in an airplane, when you actually sat next to someone else, which I think they still do, even though officially they're supposed to have a seat in between the two, right? But how many times have you like let your load off, right, to the person sitting next to you about certain people, about certain things, because you're never going to see them again, right? I have a stopover in Switzerland, right? I'm talking to some person that speaks English a little bit because they're from Switzerland. I'm never going to see them again. So let me just, let me just tell them. And I happen to use names because I don't think I'm ever going to see them again. And it happened to me, 7 years later, that person from Switzerland moves next door to that person. And, he remembers because I said a joke. And I had no intentions at all. So is that considered your fault? Again, we're not saying if it's right and wrong what you did, right? And we're not saying over here, right, that the question over here is it your fault and you have to go ahead, right, and appease that person? And is it your fault and you have to go ahead and appease that person? So the halacha is words that cause damage directly or indirectly are lashon hara. Right? Since we cannot know how information about another person might impact on his life or her life, the best way to avoid indirect harm is to avoid speaking about the other's lives, right? And therefore, the halacha is, and the Chavetz Chaim speaks about this, right, in his introduction to Hilchos Rechilas, right, in chapter 9, and I'll just read you very quickly. He quotes the Rambam, Maimonides, and he says like this. He says, "Hamisaper l'chaver dvarim," one who speaks to his friend things. So garm. Im nishmu ish mipi ish, will cause someone harm if it's heard from a person to a person. Lahaza chaver begufay, to hurt the person in his body, or b'mo means to say emotionally, or b'mono, or his money, or lahatzilo, to hurt him in any other way. Raise the lashon hara, it's lashon hara. Muchach sedin zed lashon hara enei kashar chalkin izakimamen. The laws of lashon hara are not. Let me. I'm bringing this out because I think it's very important to realize. The laws of lashon hara are not like the laws of monetary damages, because the laws of monetary damages, right, they have a certain level of limitation. Right, you break someone's window, you are obligated to pay back. That's directly. Right, you say something about an individual that will harm them monetarily. Use a smear campaign, right? And we legally in the secular world is something like that also. Harm of business through a smear campaign and things like that. There's laws like that also in Jewish law, that if you directly say something about a person's business or whatever it is and it's harming them and it's proven that that's what caused it, there could be, you could demand monetary damages, right? But if it's indirectly, it wasn't caused, it wasn't intentional or things like that, just like in the secular world, right? Then you're not obligated in damages. Says the words of the Chavetz Chaim, and that's what he brings down. Muchach medin zed is proven from this rule. Right? The lashon hara einei kashar chilkin izakimamen. The laws of lashon hara do not fall under the category of the rest of that monetary damages. Right? Even if there is monetary. So l'kasma Torah l'chayev al gorem, masha'en came belav zed lashon hara. Right? Where the Torah and the laws of monetary damages, it's only if it's directly caused by the person that is initiating the damage, right? Not if it's indirectly, right? Or indirectly, right? But not by lashon hara. And the reason for this is, listen to this. V'tam zeh ki shem benitz kemam lo maria Torah b'diavad. Let me skip for a second. Masha'enkim in yana lashon hara. Right? But the laws of lashon hara, arina d'le'inin l'chatchila imhu mutal l'daber davazer olo l'kach asar Torah. Because the laws of lashon hara are not what it is the outcome, but the outcome has to do with what you're allowed to do in the beginning. Right? So therefore, am I allowed to say something that might cause someone damages? No, I'm not allowed to do that. Right? If I say, in the laws of monetary, it's what the outcome is from my action, right? And the outcome is I'm not doing any damages, right? Maybe indirectly. So then we have to see how much it comes back to your action. But since it's not from your action, so then that's not considered damages. And again, laws of damages are very complicated. I don't want to get into it. There's a whole section of Code of Jewish Law on it, right? And a couple of tractates that deal with it, right? But it just in a sort of 20,000 high view over the concept, right? So too, but the laws of Lashon Hara is, am I allowed to say this out of my mouth right now? And if it's going to eventually come and damage, or there's a possibility that's going to come and damage, you're not allowed, right? And therefore, that's the halacha is that you are not allowed to say this. You have to be careful, and yes, you are at fault. You are at fault for what happened. And therefore, you have to go ahead and try to fix this situation. And that person got damaged. And you have to go ahead and apologize or fix it up or try to go back to that person. Listen, I was just saying it jokingly. I know, right, he was really things were good. Or I don't know. And again, you're going to ask me questions. What happens if you really didn't like the job? Or you did.
Or if you did a bad job.
Good question.
Then you're saving your in-laws from using a contractor to do that job.
So then again, what we spoke about before, and you at the time did not have to say anything. What you said at that time was not good, right? And again,
if they ask you, what do you think?
If they ask you, we spoke about that a little before, right? We spoke about it a little before. When you are asked, and it's for Tayalas, right? So then, and we're going to talk more about it later, and we spoke about it already a little bit. If you're asked, right? So then, but if you're not asked, whatever it is, and again, your opinion, how you like things, are not necessarily how other people like things. And so we have to be very careful, and this shows how far this goes, right, of our words, right? And I want to bring one more example, and again, I like doing this where we see similar ideas together. If you turn to page 12, and let's moving along, right? Page 12, another scenario where the words that you use, right, are not, thank you, day 12, page 74. Page 74, day 12. Sorry, guys. All right. But if you look at the example over there, over here is even more. You are not only trying to not to say anything negative, right, but you're trying to encourage. Right. The example. This happens often. Right. Your son is having a hard time learning. All right. Your daughter's having a hard time learning, and you want to give them encouragement and say, "No, you can do it. Don't worry about it. Right. Don't give up." And you say, your rabbi, your teacher, right? He only became religious when he was 20, right? He only became religious when he was 20. And look, what a great Torah sage he became. Don't give up, right? Don't give up. Now, your son took this the wrong way, right? And now he has ammo, right, with his friends. And he goes, Rabbi Bernstein, he was religious. And it's a terrible thing to do, but teenagers are teenagers, and you know that. And you know teenagers are teenagers. Right? Did you speak Lashon Hara? You speak Lashon Hara. So we're upping the ante over here, where we're not only not thinking that it's ever going to come back, right? Over here, we're trying to show a positive role model, right? But what you're saying could be taken out of context. Now, halacha is because information relayed cause embarrassment to the subject is Lashon Hara. This is even if you phrase your words in a compliment. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole Chavetz Chaim, right? But he says clearly, right, that the words of Lashon Hara, it's even if they're true, like we said, they're only if they're true, right? That's rechilas if they're not true, right? And even if you're trying to give a compliment to the person, right? If it comes out that there's going to be a negative connotation to that person, right? So then you're not allowed to say it. So what should you do? What should you do in such a scenario, right? Because it is, and I know I've done it, right? I've done it sometimes, right? I've used examples of people. I said, this person. I know I've spoken to people, and I've used an example. I said, this person only became religious not too long ago, and look, they've done it, they've accomplished it, they've taken on the cause, and it's a good encouragement. And so, what do you do? How are you able to? Because it's not only for this example; it's for anything, right? That somehow might have some kind of negative thing, right? Connotation, but it could be a compliment for the person changing, the person growing through it, having, this person was an alcoholic, and look what look how they are now. They're sober for 30 years, and they're, they've changed their lives, and being a good role model and changing their ways, right? Whatever the scenario, it doesn't have to be anything religious, right? But it's a powerful tool. So what do you do, right? So this is not talked. No, I'm trying to say is that we know. How are we able to use people as role models and try to make sure that we don't harm them? Okay. Right? So we said you're not allowed, right? But so how are you able to? Right? So this is not in the book, right? But one of the things, first of all, right, and this will come up later in the book, is go ahead and speak to that person beforehand. You want to use this example of the Rebbe, right? And so go over to Rabbi Bernstein and say, hey, listen, Rabbi Bernstein, I was really thinking, I know Chaim Yankel is having a hard time in yeshiva, right? And I think it'll be really powerful. In the beginning, he might use it as a joke a little bit, right? But I think it'll be very powerful, especially the other kids, right? If they knew, right, that other people have a hard time. That you yourself, look at how great you become, right? But you yourself only became religious at 20, right? Be very careful how you speak to the person, right? Because you don't want it to come out that in a negative way also. But, is it possible for me to mention something to my kid, or more important, could you bring it up, when the person himself brings it up, as a role model, as an example. And so there's ways of utilizing role models, right? In a way, by either speaking to them, that they don't care. They've used themselves as role models. They've spoken about it, right? So it depends on the scenario. I have a friend in Israel. I had a very good friend in Israel, right? We haven't talked in a couple of years, but it's still a very good friend, right? He was a study partner of mine for many years. The guy has finished the Talmud twice already, the whole tractate of Talmud twice, and he became religious later on in his life. But I know I don't use him because I know, and I definitely would not use his name. I wouldn't use his name. I had many chavrusas in Israel, right? I didn't say when it was. I know that he's sensitive about it. He's sensitive. I talked to him about it, and he's sensitive about it, right? He's, for whatever reason, every person's different, right? Doesn't make it right or wrong, right? We don't know people's feelings, and he's a little sensitive about it, right? He doesn't like talking about when before he was religious, right? He lives in a very religious neighborhood now, and we had a whole discussion if he should tell his kids, if he shouldn't tell his kids, right? And I thank God I convinced him to let his kids know, right? It was powerful, but he's very sensitive about it. So I know that he's not the right person to use as an example, right? Because I had that conversation with him, and I talked to him, and he's I'm in awe of him all the time, right? Always awe of him, still am, right? Guy's a tremendous Torah scholar, tremendous person, great, the kindest person in the world. He lived in a different city, and he came to our house, and he delivered Shalach Manos with his family. He's a great person. But he's sensitive about this. This is something that he's sensitive about. Why? I don't know. It's not my business. We all have things that we're sensitive about, right? So the way to use examples is by speaking to that person, and if you go ahead and talk about someone, even if it's you're trying to use them as a role model, but they're sensitive about it. That's lashon hara. You're not allowed to do that because you're hurting that person. And this is the last example of this scenario. I didn't look at the next halacha. We'll see that next week. Right? But at least we see 3 cases over here. So just to wrap up, 3 different scenarios of where the words that you say, right, the outcome is so powerful, even if your intentions are not negative. Right. The first one is where it's a little negative, the person drives you crazy, your sister-in-law, Mindy, that's just the example they give, and it drives you a little crazy, and you're saying something, and you didn't mean it, and, and you're saying it jokingly, or just trying to be helpful, right? If harm comes out, right, you shouldn't say it, right? And if harm comes out, then you have to go ahead and say something to the person. If not, so then you're just going to harm the person more. And therefore, that's why you don't say something. But you still have to ask repentance because that's still Lashon Hara. That's a negative thing by talking such a way. Next case we spoke about was day 11. Right, is when you have no thought in your mind that it's ever going to get back to that person, right? You're on a plane and you're talking to some stranger that you never knew, right? And you don't think you'll ever know, right? And you're just, letting loose a little bit. So you have no intentions of harming the person because you don't think it's ever going to get back to the person. And you never think that it is going to harm the person. You know how to do that, right? Now, and if it comes back to bite you, it is a problem. Because indirect doesn't make a difference how far away, how many years, and there's no statute of limitation to Lashon Hara, right? There's no such concept. And then the last case we spoke about today is day 12, right? Is when you are trying to even say something positive about the person. You're trying to use that individual, right, him or her, as a role model. Right, as a pedestal of someone to learn from, right? That person, right? You're trying to motivate coworkers and say, that person, they were lazy, right? They didn't know how to file things or to take care of things. But after their hard work, right, it took them 2 years, but they got it. And look, now they're one of the best workers here. You all could do it, yay! But you just drag that person through the mud. Oh, but no, look, I'm saying how positive they are. Look, they change their ways. So if that person talks about themselves that way, if you know that you've spoken to that person and say, hey, listen, we're so proud of you. People might look at it the wrong way, but it's a great motivation, and we really want to use you. Are we able to? And that person says, yes, I'm so excited. Please use me. Really, I changed my ways, and it was so helpful using this course or, really focusing and putting time and effort really changes it. So then, yes, and then you could do that. That person gave you permission, and they know that you're not harming them, and they know that some people might take it a little differently. So then you're allowed to, because you're using it as a motivation. But if you never ask them, or especially if they say no, but even if you never ask them, you just think it's going to be something positive. So then you're not allowed to. That's Lashon Hara, because it's not what you think, it's what happens to that other individual. Remember, Lashon Hara is what happens to that other individual. And what happens to that other individual is not how you think what's going to happen to that individual, because you don't know the person. You don't know if they're going to take it the wrong way or not. Let's finish off with a quote like we always like doing, and we'll just we'll end with this quote. Let's do 73 because I think it's very powerful. Right, the Satan is the evil inclination. Right, the one that's always trying to get us to do wrong. Right? The Satan is powerless to prosecute where there's peace. Right? If we work on peace, the Satan also is the prosecutor. Right, on the days of judgment, the Satan is also the prosecutor day to day on our lives. Right, and every day we sort of get a mini judgment of that day. Right, and not our discussion today. Right. But the Satan, the prosecutor, is powerless to prosecute if we are in peace with our neighbors, with our friends, and with the rest of the Jewish people and the rest of the world. So let's all remember this. And the way to make sure that we have peace is by being careful what comes out of our mouths. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.